Hey guys, what's going on? Back with another zombies video, and I just want to talk about a few things since we found out last week that COD Mobile is going to be bringing back the Primis crew in their zombies dark ether mode. So I actually want to go over a few things, some old storyline stuff that not if I don't think anybody knows about, but it's actually some cool stuff if you end up stumbling across it. And I know a lot of people always ask when something gets canceled, what was the ultimate final storyline going to be like, what was coming next. So I'm hoping, and I'm only putting this out there because I'm hoping COD Mobile uh, somewhat finishes the storyline. And what I'm talking about is the Chaos Crew fighting against Primis. So some of us know, if you've played zombies for a few years now, I'm actually going to leave this like this. But a lot of us probably know or realize, if you play Voyage of Despair, if you play 9, you see a lot of Aether assets inside of those maps. And people might think it's just reused assets to save money and time. But originally, the storylines were going to cross over. And what it looks like, I'm just going to say for the sake of argument, that Jason Blundell decided to cancel the Chaos crossover and make it its own story and a spin-off. That's nothing new. That's stuff that we've known obviously since Black Ops 4. But I'm actually going to talk about the storyline that was supposed to happen. Like I said, I know a lot of people usually ask about it. They ask the devs and the creative directors of the mode, like, what was coming next. I know people ask like Jimmy, and they're probably asking Blundell, and they probably asked Lee Ross. When stuff gets canceled, I guess maybe for Extinction, like what was coming next for Extinction. So I'm gonna actually talk about what I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna talk about it in a way that makes it sound like a theory, not necessarily so I don't get myself in trouble, because there's no reason I would get in trouble. It's just done through research. But at the same time, I want to do it in such a way that's kind of vague, that hopefully COD Mobile Call of Duty is going to continue that storyline, because what it actually was supposed to be, and I'm inside Origins, which is the Great War, World War I, and how it eventually was supposed to conclude, I guess, or end, or the final conclusion is the Chaos Crew was supposed to, or they might still eventually, fight against Primis in the Great War. Chaos Crew was actually here in the Great War. As far as how they get here and the more specifics about it, I'm not going to mention any of that. But in the backstory, Chaos Crew and Primis ended up at the Great War together, and they were both fighting over the same artifact, which I'm not going to tell you what that is, and you can probably maybe guess what it is. And you got to think about something that's powerful, that's not the summoning key, that both of them needed this artifact for their own personal gain, personal use. And again, I don't want to keep spinning around and get people sick, but I'm just going to leave it like that. So, what ultimately they were going to do, or the storyline should have been, slash, what it should or was going to be, was eventually maybe Chaos Crew and Permis Crew were going to be in the same story, Aether storyline, maybe just another Victus, maybe another like Shadows of Evil crew, another Mob of the Dead crew, but it was all supposed to still be inside the Aether story, and eventually they were going to clash. How Scarlet needed the artifact for her own personal use. That I might actually not know what it is specifically, but even if I did, I probably wouldn't mention it, because again, this stuff is really vague, and I try and tell some of the Treyarch zombie devs that some stuff I think would be better told, or the zombies community over the years. Um, some of the other modes, quote unquote, failed, or storylines, because nobody does research in the zombies community, or nobody does the amount of research that's required for the zombie storyline if you really want to know what's going on. So that's why I think IW Zombies, World War II Zombies, and maybe even eventually the Chaos story, is the zombies community needs somebody to help them along and show them what to look at, what stuff means. So with all that being said, that's kind of one of the reasons I decided to do this is I want people to know and understand that, and you can, again, like I said, you can tell if you go into Voyage of Despair on the Titanic map, and maybe 9, actually probably not 9, probably Voyage of Despair. There's a lot of Aether assets inside Voyage of Despair on the Titanic, because the storyline were originally going to be in the same Aether story, but I think Blundell, I'm going to just say, like, again, for the sake of argument, Blundell decided to cancel them being in the same storyline when the maps were already made and decided to spin it off into the um, Chaos story. But eventually, I don't, it might still work, or might have worked better. So I don't know if that was his intention, to have separate storylines then eventually cross over, because how the crossover was supposed to work or might still work in COD Mobile is eventually we get another World War One map or another Great War map, and it was going to conclude where Chaos is going to be on one side. You can choose if you want to be Chaos, or on the other side you could be Primis or Ultimus, however they decided. More than likely, I think it was going to be Primis. But the Chaos crew is going to be on one side. I don't know if you would play as them or give it maybe two separate endings. Um, you can choose to play as the Chaos crew, and then you defeat Primus, and then you get whatever cutscene, or you could load in as Primus, and then eventually defeat uh, the Chaos crew Scarlet to get the artifact, and then you get your ending. Not necessarily being a good ending or bad ending. But with that being said, I think Primus is actually the bad guys. So you would say eventually that Primus is the bad ending, and the Chaos Crew would have been the good ending, from what I've seen. So again, this is really just to kind of somewhat lay the groundwork and let people start realizing or understanding what might come, or on the development side, what probably should come. Because again, there is no leadership in the zombies community. People don't know what to research, what to look at, what stuff means. Again, I've mentioned it a few times, and I always don't want to sound toxic, but what Treyarch gives you is really only like 15%, 20% of the storyline, and in turn, that means that the zombies community only really knows 20% of the storyline itself, because you're meant to go and research and go look at the Great War, look at stuff in pop culture, and see where the story was going to go, or kind of like you could almost think of it. Let's think a bit about um, the Terminator movies, I guess. You have like 6 Terminator movies or 5 Terminator movies. Let's just say the Black Ops series fills in those gaps in between each story. So it's the same thing with the zombie story. Is it's filling in the gaps for stuff that you actually see in movies and stuff like that. So if you connect the dots, you'll know that the Great War um, was where ultimately Chaos Crew and Primus were going to fight. And then the maps kind of fill in those gaps. Let's say again you have like Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and they decided to put the zombie story in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. The maps are filling in the gaps of the movie, and you have to go see the movie to understand every single or a bigger, more detail. They can't, and that's I think what's the roadblock is people don't understand that Treyarch, Call of Duty, Activision, they can't duplicate every single movie, comic book, TV show that they take inspiration from. They can't literally do that. They would get sued and copyright. The people that write the stories, the authors, the writers would probably sue, saying, "Hey, you took my story and you made it into a video game." Where they could only take a small amount of stuff and then put it in the maps. So it's up to you now to go find the movies and books and TV shows where everything is based off of. And if you do that, you'll know that the Chaos Crew is inside the Aether storyline, but for some reason, Jason Blundell ended up doing more like a spin-off or changing the path. Eventually, that path can probably still come together in a later Black Ops game, or eventually maybe COD Mobile. Again, that's where I'm kind of getting at, and I know eventually I start going in circles, but COD Mobile should connect, since they're both, the characters are already there in the game and the assets are already there. Should kind of continue how originally it was going to be. The original idea of they're both in the Aether storyline, so now it's gonna look different. Now it's gonna look like they're just mashing everything thing together. But eventually, that's how it was originally gonna be. Is Chaos is inside the Aether story, but Blundell decided to split it off instead. So now COD Mobile gives them the chance to continue that storyline, where maybe like one map you get some Primis characters, or a couple Primis maps, and then you can get some Chaos maps, and eventually they would kind of meet at the end. Let's say for some reason they're going to give you 10 maps, 5 maps could be Chaos maps, and then 5 maps could be Aether maps, Dark Aether map, and show you eventually maybe in the 10th final map how those paths eventually cross. So I hope this made sense. Again, they were going to fight in the Great War eventually, or they still might eventually fight in the Great War, where instead of Apothicons versus Keepers, it's going to be Chaos versus Primus. Again, I'm hoping that would be a perfect little story for COD Mobile, or even the main premium game, to eventually just give you the Chaos Primus versus Chaos Crew storyline. I think would be pretty awesome. Have it come back to maybe a Great War, maybe World War One, or another Great War in history, or a Great War in like fantasy, or a fantasy Great War. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Thanks.